Imagine a world where your birth decides your tax bill, your courtroom, your career, your right to speak. Now imagine the bottom of that world stands up, looks the natural order in the eyes, and says, no. And they don't just complain, they rewrite reality. They pull a king off his throne. They rename time itself. They turn citizen into a sacred word. And then, this is the part nobody expects, they build a blade so efficient it becomes the logo of their new justice. Because the French Revolution is not just liberty, it's also the darkest question any revolution ever asks. When you finally get power, what does power do to you? This story isn't only about France, it's about you. That moment you believe in something so hard you'd bet your life on it. And then you discover your enemies also believe just as hard that you are the problem. The French Revolution is a war inside the human heart. Justice versus revenge. Ideals versus survival. Hope versus fear. And the temptation to fix the world by breaking people. We're going deep into the rabbit hole, but I'll leave breadcrumbs all the way down. Breadcrumb questions, our compass. Keep these questions in your pocket. We'll return to them. Who deserves justice and who decides? What happens when fear becomes policy? Can ideals survive power? All right, let's enter the old world first so we understand why the new world exploded. The old world. Some are born to eat, others to starve. Before the revolution, France isn't just a country, it's a stacked system. People talk about the 3 estates like it's a neat diagram, but it's really a hierarchy of pain. At the top, privilege. At the bottom, payment. And here's the problem that turns frustration into danger. The state is broke. So the king calls a meeting that sounds harmless, but is basically a political earthquake, the Estates General. And once you gather a nation to talk about money, you're not just discussing budgets, you're asking a forbidden question. Who owns the country? The door that changes history. Then comes a moment that feels small but hits like thunder. Royal officials lock the Third Estate out. So the Third Estate does something revolutionary in the simplest way. They walk into an indoor tennis court and swear an oath. We will not leave until France has a constitution. That's the tennis court oath. It lands on June 20th, 1789, like a match into dry hay. History lesson, apparently the fastest way to start a revolution is to inconvenience the people who pay the bills. The Bastille, when a symbol falls. A few weeks later, Paris is boiling. People want weapons, they want gunpowder, they want proof that fear can be pushed back. And on July 14th, 1789, a crowd storms a fortress prison, the Bastille. Was it a giant military victory? Not exactly, but symbolically, it's like watching the invincible sign above tyranny flicker and go dark. Breadcrumb number 1, the people are discovering something intoxicating. A crowd can change the world in a day. The dream. Men are born free. Now what? After the Bastille, something incredible happens. The revolution becomes an idea factory. And one document becomes the moral engine of the early revolution, the Declaration. In 1789, the National Assembly issues the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. It declares boldly that people are born free and equal in rights. It names rights like liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. This is the revolution at its best, not just rage, but vision. But here's the problem. Ideas don't fill stomachs. The Women's March. Hunger enters the palace. In October, Parisians rise again. On October 5th, a mass march goes to Versailles, and the next day, the royal family is brought back to Paris. When the grocery bill becomes political philosophy,
Even a palace can get an eviction notice. Breadcrumb number 2. The revolution is now trapped between two clocks. The slow clock of laws and reforms, and the fast clock of hunger and fear. And the fast clock always feels louder. Act 3. The turn. Trust dies in a carriage. Here's the moment the revolution's innocence breaks. In June 1791, the royal family tries to escape Paris, the flight of Varennes. They're caught and brought back, because if the king is running, then the king is not with the revolution. And once trust collapses, fear takes its place. War plus panic equals gasoline. By April 20th, 1792, revolutionary France declares war on Austria. Threats surround the revolution, internal revolts spread, and pressure creates the most brutal question of all. How do you defend liberty without destroying liberty? The Republic and the King's death. In September 1792, the National Convention abolishes the monarchy and establishes a republic. Then the King, Louis XVI, is tried and executed by guillotine on January 21, 1793. That's not just an execution, that's the point of no return. Because once you kill the king, you're no longer reforming the system, you're replacing it. Breadcrumb number 3. The revolution now believes if we lose, we die. And when politics becomes survival, mercy becomes a luxury. The terror. Justice goes on a diet and only eats heads. To save the revolution builds a machine. In April 1793, the National Convention creates the Committee of Public Safety. And then comes the phase that haunts history like a shadow you can't outrun, the Reign of Terror. It runs from September 5th, 1793 to July 27th, 1794. Terror becomes policy, meant to crush enemies inside and outside France. You know your revolution is stressed when it starts solving political disagreements the way toddlers solve sharing. Mine, and if not mine, gone. Thousands are executed through official processes, and many more die in prison or without trial. And something even worse happens. The blade doesn't just kill enemies, it starts hunting allies. Robespierre's trapdoor, virtue and terror. Here's the intellectual trapdoor. Robespierre argues that in a revolution, popular government needs both virtue and terror. Terror framed as swift justice. This is the most dangerous idea in revolutionary history because it sounds noble. If we are virtue, then whatever we do becomes justice. And once you believe that, any disagreement looks like treason. Suspicion becomes evidence. Fear becomes morality. The spike, when the machine speeds up. Even institutions accelerate. After the law of 22 Pranier in June 1794, the revolutionary tribunal's death sentences surge. Breadcrumb number 4, the big one. When fear becomes a moral system, survival becomes virtue, and mercy becomes suspicious. Thermidor, the revolution eats its own. And then, like a thriller where the hero becomes the monster, Robespierre falls. The Thermidorian reaction begins on July 27, 1794. And Robespierre is executed on July 28, 1794. The blade built to protect the revolution finishes by devouring its loudest protector. The revolution eats its own. Not because people are evil in a cartoon way, but because power plus fear plus moral certainty is a chemical reaction. Aftermath, from ideal to administration. And then Napoleon. After the terror, France doesn't return to the old world, but it also can't live inside permanent emergency. A new era follows, the Directory, and instability continues. Then, in November 1799, a coup ends the revolutionary chapter. The coup of 1819 Brumaire. on November 9th, 10th, 1799, overthrows the Directory and brings Napoleon Bonaparte to power as first consul. The revolution starts by shouting, "No more kings," and ends by hiring a guy who eventually becomes an emperor. History has a sense of humor, dark humor, but still humor. The moral spine, bring it back to us. So, what was the French Revolution? It was a people's uprising that shattered an old order. It produced world-changing language of rights and citizenship. And it proved something uncomfortable. Ideals are fragile when fear is constant, war is near, hunger is loud, and power feels like the only shield. Now, our breadcrumb questions. Who deserves justice and who decides? The revolution tried to answer, the nation, but in
panic, the nation shrank into committees and tribunals. What happens when fear becomes policy? You get terror, organized violence justified as necessity. Can ideals survive power? Yes, but only when power submits to rules, restraint, and accountability. Otherwise, ideals become costumes power wears. And here's the final truth. A revolution can be born from justice and still be capable of injustice. Because the enemy isn't only the tyrant out there. Sometimes the enemy is the part of us that says, if I'm right, then anything I do is justified. If this story made you rethink what power does to believers, hit like, subscribe, and comment. What do you think is more dangerous, the old tyranny or the new certainty?